Hello, everyone. A warm welcome and thank you for attending today's webinar on transforming post-secondary language programs with proficiency testing. I am Andrew Bowen from LTI, the administrator of all actual language proficiency assessments, and it is our honor to host Leanne Spino-Cejas from the University of Rhode Island this afternoon. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. We will open up the webinar to questions and comments from attendees twice today. Once around our halfway point, we'll say around 2:30, and then again at the end. If you would like to participate, please at any point throughout the webinar, go ahead and post in the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. I will be keeping a close eye on what appears there, and of course, we'll address the content once it's time. It's also important to note that we at LTI are collaborating with world language educators across the nation to create what is called the LTI Higher Education Panel. The goal of this group is to inspire, mentor, and share knowledge with fellow language educators who are also using or examining ways to use actual assessments for their language programs, whether it's for the placement of students into those language programs, monitoring their progress in proficiency, or providing them, of course, with that heralded actual language proficiency certificate upon graduation. If you are interested in joining our panel or would like to learn more about it, you will see a brief questionnaire sent to you along with a video recording of this webinar by Monday, February 17th. And without further ado, it is truly a pleasure to introduce Leanne Spino-Cejas. Dr. Spino-Cejas is an assistant professor of Spanish at URI. She is also the proficiency coordinator for the Department of Modern and Classical Languages and Literatures, whose goals include, but of course are not limited to, the preparation of highly proficient speakers of language with international experience, not only within the Modern and Classical Languages program, but also across fields of study. The cross-discipline program that she and her colleagues have developed up there in Rhode Island is truly remarkable, and I, for one, am excited to learn more about it. Leanne, the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you so much for the warm introduction. Thank you everyone for being here and for taking the time out of your busy schedules. The title for today's talk is Transforming Post-Secondary Language Programs with Proficiency Testing. At URI, we're doing a large transformation of our languages department, and part of that involves proficiency testing. And so I'll give you a bit of context and exactly what we're doing here. But first, as Andrew noted, I'm at the University of Rhode Island. And just to give you a little bit of context, I started in the fall of 2018. So I'm relatively new to the University of Rhode Island. And I jumped onto this initiative after it had already started. And before that, I was at Princeton University as a Spanish lecturer. And before that, I got my PhD in second language studies at Michigan State University. So just to give you a little bit of background as to my orientation and perhaps how I'm approaching this proficiency initiative at the University of Rhode Island. So the outline of the webinar today, what I'll do first is I'll explain a little bit the context of the University of Rhode Island and kind of how this proficiency initiative was born and the rationale for it. And then I'll move in kind of into the nitty-gritty, the logistics of the proficiency initiative. And there's lots of logistics to cover, but I'm going to focus on training, faculty training, to be able to support this initiative, testing for our students, and revamping of the curricula. We're at different stages in each of these processes, but I'll give you kind of the full picture of where we're at and where we plan on going. And finally, I'll end with some of the benefits that we've seen from this proficiency initiative, and especially the testing that we've been conducting. So I hope that sounds good, and that's what you signed up for. So a little bit of background about the Department of Modern and Classical Languages and Literatures at URI, and for obvious reasons, we shorten it to the Department of Languages. We're a big program. We have over 750 language majors, and I think we're almost crossing into the 800 language majors realm. Our students can major in 8 languages. So the options are Chinese, French, German, Italian, Spanish, and then Global and Language Area Studies, which has different tracks, including Arabic, Classical Studies, and Japanese. And we have a lot of large programs. We have the largest Chinese flagship program in the country. And then depending on how you count programs and what numbers you use, we can also have the largest German and Italian programs in the country and one of the top 3 largest French programs in the country. And again, this depends on how you count numbers, but all of this is just to say that we're big. we have a lot of students and a lot of majors. We also have 34 international programs and partnerships at last count that we maintain. And so with all of these majors, the majority of them are actually not just language majors. The vast majority of our language students participate in one of our signature dual degree programs. And so these are all of them. We have international engineering, which I think was our first dual degree program that they proposed in, 1987. And so we actually have a lot of engineers in our language classes. We have an international business program, pharmaceutical sciences program, computer science program, TMD, textiles, fashion, merchandising, and design. As I mentioned before, we have a very successful Chinese language flagship program, and our newest signature dual degree program is the International Studies and Diplomacy program. And this context is important because it gives a little bit of background about our students. Most of our students are studying a language for a specific purpose, and that is to pair it with another major and to be more marketable when they go out on the workforce. So we have a very specific type of student here at URI. And so we've had a historically strong department with many successes. As you can see from these signature programs and the number of majors that we have, we're a vibrant department. We have lots and lots of students, and these dual degree programs have really been fantastic. But lots of language departments across the United States face challenges, and we of course weren't impervious to that, right? So like a lot of universities across the US, our language requirement was abolished, I think in 2016. And that led to falling enrollments. I think when I compared the numbers in fall of 2015 to fall of 2019, we lost something like 30% of our students. Now, our number of majors has stayed actually very strong, in part because of those signature language or those signature programs, and for other reasons that I'll talk about in this webinar. But we did have to face that, as do many other language departments. And many departments across the United States, especially if they're a multi-language department like ours is, evidence kind of a siloed working culture. Again, which is normal. If you have multiple languages in a single department, a lot of times languages will work together, right? The French faculty with French and Spanish with Spanish, that makes sense, right? Also in languages departments, you see a lot of different research specializations. And so you have people that maybe focus on literature or those that focus on linguistics. And sometimes that can lead to more of a siloed working culture. Sometimes in language departments, you can see kind of a stratification between those that teach lower division and upper division courses. And so not all of that was evidenced at the University of Rhode Island, but we did historically have different kinds of siloed working cultures. That's not always a bad thing. So for example, one of our most successful signature programs is the International Engineering Program, and that started in German. And so the siloed working culture there gave birth to one of our greatest signature programs. It's not always a bad thing, but historically, that's kind of how things have functioned. And then we shifted focus. We have a new chair. Her name's Karin de Bruin, and she had a really great vision for the Department of Languages at the University of Rhode Island. Her background's actually in literature, so that's fun to keep in mind when I talk to you about everything that we're doing here at URI. And what her focus was, and what we're all doing now, is pooling our resources. So instead of kind of competing for funding or for ways to get initiatives done, we've decided to work as one unit under the premise that we can do more together than we could separately. And so because we're pooling our resources, we're pooling them behind the same shared goals here at the University of Rhode Island. And that really has made us stronger. And it's allowed us to continue to transform our language program, even though there are certain challenges, right? We don't have our language requirement like we used to, for example. And so, yeah, that's kind of the context for what we're doing here at the University of Rhode Island. So the goal that we're working towards with the majority of our students is what's on your screen right now. And it's to prepare culturally competent, highly proficient speakers of language with international experience in the professions. And so if you break that down, you'll see that there's actually like a lot packed into there. We have students that have to become culturally competent, highly proficient, have international experience, and in the professions. And so I want to kind of just be clear about exactly what I'm going to touch on today. And it's really this part, the highly proficient speakers aspect of our goal. That's not all we do. So I hope you don't leave this webinar thinking that this is kind of the only thing we're working towards. It's not. It's part of a larger picture. But the two most recent goals are this proficiency initiative, and then we also have an intercultural communicative competence initiative that is new as well. And towards the end, I'll mention that a bit more. But for now, let's continue on with this proficiency initiative. The genesis of this proficiency initiative came from probably a few different places. And one of them is our Chinese language flagship program. Our Chinese language flagship program is impressive, to say the least. They take students with no functional ability in Chinese and somehow get them up to superior. And so, oops, I'm sorry about that. And so it's quite impressive. And they do this through lots of, well, first of all, great instruction and great students, but they also do language benchmarking, and they do proficiency testing to see where their students are. And so that was kind of in the back of this department's mind. And I say their mind because I wasn't here when they thought of this, but yeah, so the Chinese language flagship program was definitely an inspiration. And then they also proposed this new signature program called the International Studies in Diplomacy, or ISD program. And what that program is a dual degree where students earn a bachelor's degree in a language and international studies. And so they take language courses, but then they also take courses in political science and economics and anthropology. They must study abroad for at least one semester. We try to promote 2. And this is the kicker, they must evidence advanced low speaking proficiency to be able to graduate from this program. And the idea is to prepare students for careers in maybe the foreign service or diplomacy, international NGOs, or any other kind of international career. But this stipulation that they must evidence advanced low speaking proficiency really made us realize that, well, we need a shift across all of our language programs. Now, only ISD students have to graduate with advanced low speaking proficiency. Students that are enrolled in our other signature programs don't necessarily have to get to advanced low. But still, the ISD students are going to be in all of our language classes. They actually already are in all of our language classes. And so we needed to shift. We needed to make sure that we were teaching our students and training our students about language acquisition so that they all could get to advanced low, or as many as possible, regardless of whether they're ISD students or not. And so, as a result, this proficiency initiative was born at the University of Rhode Island, where we really sought to increase the proficiency of all of our language students. The rationale for this is that the majority of our students are dual majors. I think the IEP program alone has 400 students in it, the International Engineering Program, and we have 750 plus majors. So most, and then that's only IEP, right? Other students are in the other international programs. So most of our students are dual majors. they are taking this language so that they can use it once they graduate and hopefully pair it with their career. And language skills are indeed needed on the workforce. And so ACTFL has a new report, Making Languages Our Business, addressing foreign language demand among US employers. And I encourage everyone to go and read that report because it's useful for thinking about our language programs. It's also useful in recruiting students, taking some of the information out of that report and explaining to them why studying a language could be beneficial for them once they graduate. And this initiative also resonated with our upper administration, which is always a plus. So we have support all the way up through the pipeline for this proficiency initiative. So I'll get into a little bit now about the logistics of the initiative. This initiative is facilitated by a proficiency coordinator, which is me. I'm the departmental hire in 2018. And so I've started a three-pronged strategy. One is faculty training, 2 is proficiency testing, and 3 is curricular revamping. And so I'll go through each of those 3 things. So let's dive first into faculty training. The goal for faculty training was to increase our faculty's knowledge of the ACTFL guidelines and proficiency-oriented instruction more generally. And so if you look on the screen, these are the ACTFL guidelines. I'm hoping you're familiar with them, but if not, I'll give it a very quick run through for you. There are our 5 main proficiency levels: novice, intermediate, advanced, superior, and distinguished. And if you look at each of those boxes, you can see the functions or what students can do at each of those different proficiency levels. And so you can see what it means to be advanced in that box. And so advanced students can narrate and describe in all major timeframes and handle a situation with a complication. And so the goal for our ISD students is advanced low, and we're working towards getting to advanced low for all of our students. And so faculty needed to understand this, right? Like faculty, all of our faculty needed to understand how our students' proficiency would be measured and what the goals were for each course, kind of articulated on up. And so it was really important that everyone had a common understanding of these guidelines. And so how did we do that? We got training through ACTFL. We had all full-time faculty members attend a 4-day OPI training. And so we hosted 5 4-day OPI trainings in French, German, Chinese, Spanish, and English so that we could have full coverage and everyone could attend the 4-day training. And as a result of that training, 14 of our full-time faculty members are either certified OPI testers or in the process of becoming certified. And so that's over 40% of our full-time faculty. So we have a very strong base in the ACTFL guidelines. We also brought other ACTFL workshops to us. We're taking part in the virtual learning modules and other resources across our department. We also are getting training, or have gotten training, through Dr. Erwin Scherner from the University of Leipzig. We were fortunate to have him here as a Max K Distinguished Scholar in the fall of 2019. He gave us various different lectures that really helped us kind of cement this initiative and think critically about what we were doing. And he also worked one-on-one with faculty members. He's a prolific researcher and just a delightful human being. It was really great to have him here, and we're looking forward to continuing to work with him. So he came. We also did in-house training. And so I will do training for faculty. I'll also meet one-on-one with faculty to talk about what's going on in their courses or what their goals are for their students. I will consult about anything and everything, what tests could look like, all of these things. And as a result, we now have a culture of kind of sharing successes and challenges across all languages. I should note that my hire as the proficiency coordinator was a departmental hire. It was an interesting call, a call that I hadn't seen before because it was non-language specific. And so they left the language open, which was really great and kind of showed how everyone was working together towards this initiative. And so as a result, I work with faculty members in all languages and kind of help cement that unification behind this initiative. So I explained a little bit about number one, the faculty training. Let's dive into the proficiency testing. So first, I'd like to go into a little bit about why we test. Testing is becoming more and more common in secondary institutions, especially with the advent of the seal of biliteracy. And so I think that starting in 2021, students will be able to take the seal of biliteracy in high schools in Rhode Island. And so I'm looking forward to that because we're going to have a really nice articulation, I hope at least, from the secondary to the post-secondary level. Right? Even now, I have students coming into my classes that kind of understand this or have taken the Apple test or something like that. And so that's really nice to see. I really think that we should be thinking a lot more than what we do about that articulation between secondary and post-secondary institutions. And so having an initiative like this one, especially with kind of the booming success of the Seal of Biliteracy, really does help to marry those two levels together. Another reason why we test is that iterative testing is a clear and consistent reminder of our goals. And that's not just for faculty, that's for students too. It's for upper administration. We see a lot of great washback from these testers, from this testing for all of the stakeholders involved. Even more reasons why we test. It also allows us to track progress towards our goals. And it allows us to make evidence-based changes to our program. So we can see if something worked and we can see if something didn't work, right? And react accordingly. And that's really important. It helps us utilize resources more effectively because we know what worked and what didn't, and we can allocate our funds accordingly. It's also a really useful advising tool. And so we have access to our students' test scores, we know where they are, and we can advise them accordingly about what they need to do to continue to increase their proficiency. Also, because all of our faculty members have attended these workshops, all of our full-time faculty members, it affords us the ability to offer differentiated instruction. We can give speaking assignments, which are kind of mockish OPICs, where we get kind of a feeling for what level they're at. Now, this isn't an official score, but you know, we're trained enough to be able to eyeball more or less where our students are at, and then react accordingly, differentiate the instruction accordingly. Now, ideally, we actually have test scores for most of the students, so we don't always have to do it, but sometimes we have a student that we don't have a test score for, and we can kind of know more or less where they're at and modify the instruction accordingly. Another reason why we test is that students enter the workforce with internationally recognized certificates of their proficiency, which is great. I'm hoping that that's the tiebreaker, right? Not all language programs can ensure that their students are proficient in the language that they studied, right? And a lot of places, it's just you take X amount of courses and then you're done. But our students have this extra thing that they go out onto the job market with, right? And that's an actual certificate. And we're looking to train them so that they know how to communicate that to potential employers. And so there are lots of tests available, and they're all great. Andrew, do you want to talk a little bit about the tests that you all offer?
Sure, happy to do it. We have some great questions rolling in, so I'm kind of scrambling to keep track of those. But yeah, very quickly, ACTFL does offer a wide variety of language proficiency assessments. Leanne has mentioned the Apple and the Alira are both used very widely, especially you know, with the growing popularity of the Seal of Biliteracy in K through 12. In higher ed, we will typically see the OPI, the oral proficiency interview that we all know and love, as well as the OPI-C, which of course is the computerized version of that. I'm sure Leanne will get into some of the details there. There's also an ACTFL writing test, a separate listening test, as well as a separate reading test. These can all be rated. I'm seeing that there is one question about the you know, the standards and the scales used. All of these assessments can be rated on either the ACTFL proficiency scale, the ILR proficiency scale, or the CEFR, the Common European Framework Reference Scale. These, of course, are all administered online, except for the OPI, which is still telephonic. It is no longer face-to-face with the cassette recordings as it began, but they are all online. And then, of course, at the department level, we can keep an eye on all of this proficiency testing that's going on. As Leanne has mentioned, you can, sort the data, you can chart it, you can graph it, you can do a lot of different things with those proficiency ratings. And of course, I'll provide my email address if you have any questions about them. Happy to answer.
Great, thank you so much. And so there's also a lot of different validation research on all of these tests. And so I would invite you to look into it more if after this presentation you're perhaps interested in implementing some of these tests. So which tests do we use? We use, as I think I mentioned, primarily the OPIC, and we also use the ALIRA test. As I mentioned, this is a department initiative, and classical studies Latin is part of the department, and they very happily administer the ALIRA test. So we have a united front on our testing. But I'll dive into a little bit more about the reasons why we use the OPIC, because that is the test that we're using the most. First and foremost, aligns with the ACFL guidelines, which was important to us. It's what we're trained on and what we know. It's super easy to schedule and administer, and it's like a relatively quick test, 30 minutes. It was cost effective for us, and it's a reliable test. And so I invite you to look at it, Dan Isbell and Paula Winke's paper if you're interested in more information about the OPIC. So I'll go into more of the logistics of how the tests are conducted. Testing occurs every single semester, and students are tested twice during their studies. And testing is linked to specific courses. That's how we get this done and ensure that students take the test. So testing actually occurs during class time or finals time, and they go up to the language laboratory. We have a language laboratory from like the grammar translation days that we're looking to revamp. But in the meantime, all of those carols with the computers and the headsets are actually very conducive to testing. So that's where they take their language tests at the moment. And students come in, they take a questionnaire, they take the OPIC and then another questionnaire just so that we have more information about our students. And they can also come to drop-in testing sessions if they miss class that day or something like that. And so I said that students get tested twice during their studies. We test them at what we call the midpoint and the endpoint. And so the midpoint actually varies by language, but we selected like bottleneck courses. So courses that we know that our students are going to pass through. And we tried to get them kind of at the middle of the student studies. And so that generally is the 4th to the 6th semester if they're starting at the 101, at the very first level class. Now, this gets a little bit messy because not all students start in Spanish 101. And so like the midpoint actually occurs at the beginning of their studies, if that makes sense. But again, we wanted data on it, all of our students that continue on to major. And so this was the way that we could ensure that we could do that. And then we also test our endpoint students. So right when they're about to major, or right when they're about to graduate. And so this occurs in 400 level courses because that's our highest level course that we offer at the undergraduate level. And they're tested before graduation. And this is only for majors. And if they're not graduating, but they're still enrolled in that class where testing is occurring, we give them some kind of alternate assignment. That can look like a lot of different things, right? Like it can be like a training module about language acquisition and how languages are acquired. It could be like a practice non-official test or something like that. We're creative there. And I'm sure that at least someone in the audience is wondering how in the world we fund these tests. And I will tell you about how we fund our tests, but there are a lot of different options for purchasing tests that I frankly don't know all of them. But Andrew, you do. Can you fill in my blank here, Andrew?
Sure, yeah. As Leanne mentioned, there are a few options as far as, how these testing initiatives are funded. Some departments, some institutions do fund these initiatives on the department or institution level. They are recipients of grants, so on and so forth. So they are able to fund it themselves. There is another account type that LTI can set up for ACTFL assessments that is called an academic individual account. This actually allows students from their dorm rooms or from wherever they are to order and pay for their own tests. They are able to then show up to campus or even add the remote proctoring option to the assessments to either take the assessment from the comfort of their own homes or come to campus and save a few dollars and have it proctored locally right there. Again, in that case, the students are paying directly on the website, so the department has no financial obligation whatsoever, but they still do see the data. What Leanne has done is a little bit different, and I'll let her go ahead and explain that.
Yeah. So what we do at URI is we use, oh, and thank you, Andrew, by the way, for filling in my blank. What we do at URI is we use course fees to pay for testing. Now, these course fees actually do a lot more. I think students are assessed $25 per language course that they take at URI. And the course fees pay for programs and supplies that directly benefit students. And so one of those things is testing, but they actually fund a lot more than that. They fund peer mentoring programs. So that could be like tutoring, conversation buddies, program ambassadors, or any kind of supplies that help us run and function, again, for the students. So like copies or language lab equipment and things like that. So the nice thing about this, though, is that it provides consistent financial support for the testing. So since students are always paying these course fees, we're always able to support them. And part of that support comes in the form of testing. Now, remember, they can take these test scores and then go out on the job market with them, right? So it's an actual tangible, at least electronically tangible thing that they can take to employers. And yeah, that allows us to continue to look at our program, look at how we're doing, and make changes in either our instruction or our training of students to continue to improve our program. So it's really a win-win for all. So I talked about faculty training, I talked about proficiency testing, and now I'll talk about curricular revamping quickly. So our curriculum revamping is actually in a relatively nascent phase, depending on the language. I should mention that, so I got here in 2018, like the slide says. So we focus first of all, training our faculty so that we all know the ACTFL guidelines well and what proficiency-oriented instruction could and should look like. So that was kind of number one. And number two, we started the testing. We started our testing in the spring of last year. And so we've gone through 2 testing rounds so far. And so that was kind of where we focused our efforts first. And so now that we're just starting to get kind of the first testing results in, and now that we're all kind of more trained as to what this all could mean, we're looking into curricular revamping and what that could look like. So like I said, we're in a relatively nascent phase depending on the language. Some languages are ahead, so they just started this process earlier. We have some faculty members, Nico Traxdorf and Damon Rarick. They're working on, or they've worked on, a new German language textbook, and so they're implementing that actually right now, which is great. And so, yeah, but other languages maybe haven't necessarily started this yet. But we're hoping that this will be kind of like a 5-year process to revamp courses from the bottom up. We're asking each language to create a proficiency roadmap as to what this revamping will look like for them. And we're hoping to kind of share these roadmaps and let good ideas cross-pollinate across languages. But, we recognize that class time restrictions make it really difficult to get students to advance low proficiency. The university system was not created with the limitations of language acquisition in mind, right? The contact hours just don't work out really well in our favor. for getting them to advanced low proficiency. And so we're trying to kind of fill in the gaps, working on online training modules about language acquisition, and the development of language proficiency, maybe building out training for study abroad. They've started this for the International Engineering Program, which is fantastic, but I think we need to build it out. You know, studying abroad isn't the magic bullet. Studying abroad doesn't necessarily increase language proficiency. It matters what you do abroad, right? And so students have to be very carefully trained so that they take advantage of their time abroad. And a lot of our students do study abroad, and so we really have great potential to train them well and to have them see great language gains while they're not here. And so I'd just like to kind of round out this webinar by talking about some of the benefits that we've seen from this proficiency initiative. And I'll start by going over some of the benefits for the students. We've seen, well, we're hoping to see, because we're still doing all of our curricular revamping, but we're hoping to see increased proficiency levels from our students. And I'm confident that we will. We have the mechanism by which to measure their proficiency levels. And we also have the ability to see if any of the changes that we're making are helpful or not. And so, you know, we should be able to do this. And I'm super excited to see what the future brings for the University of Rhode Island. Other benefits is that there's a super clear synergy between language and other majors for our students. That really helps with recruitment. It really helps with retention. And I really think it helps them when they graduate and get on the job market, being actually able to speak the language that they studied, right? I probably didn't do this enough justice, but for a lot of our signature programs, not only do they study abroad, they do an internship abroad. And so, for example, a lot of the German majors, for example, they'll study abroad for one semester and then they'll do an internship in engineering for a semester. So these are students that have a ton of international experience, are comfortable kind of you know, living in a gray area where they're out of their country and out of their comfort zone, and that only makes them better employees in the future. So other benefits of benefits for our students of this initiative is that they go on the job market with that certification of their proficiency level. And I know I've mentioned that before, but that's key for them. And so I've been talking a lot about the Proficiency Initiative, but I just want to reiterate that this isn't all we're trying to do at the University of Rhode Island. Our only goal is not to just create proficient speakers, right? We're coming at this from a more holistic perspective, and our newest initiatives are this Proficiency Initiative, but also our new initiative on intercultural communicative competence. And so I think I mentioned that my position was a department hire. And so it was not language specific. I function at the department level and help multiple languages towards this initiative. We also hired this year someone else, Dr. Bing Mu, who goes over this intercultural communicative competence initiative for our department. And so we're looking forward to kind of building that out more in the future. So when we go back and we revamp our courses, we're also going to revamp them with intercultural communicative competence in mind. So benefits of the Proficiency Initiative for our faculty, we're working together towards these shared goals. It's really nice to have like a common understanding about where we are and where we're going that everyone shares. Just as a case in point, and I'm not pretending, like we really are all on board on this. And as a case in point, we passed a resolution when we decided to do the proficiency testing about how the testing would be implemented and what that would look like. And 100% of our faculty voted in favor of that resolution. So we really are all on board for this and what this looks like. And because we're all on board, it removes a lot of the problems. So we have the strategic pooling of resources. When we're looking for a new hire, we think about what are our goals as a department? And then we can do things like leave the language of who we're trying to hire open in a lot of cases, right, to help us towards our shared goals. Our chair, Karin de Bruin, is really good at this kind of strategic thinking and bringing us all together, because we really are stronger when we work together. And yeah, the specialty, another nice thing about this initiative is that the specialties of all of our faculty members are critical to the success of this initiative. This initiative encompasses everyone, no matter what your research specialization is. And because we all have that kind of common understanding about what the guidelines are and what that could mean for instruction, everyone can see how they fit into this. So if you teach literature classes, you can see the really clear link between teaching literature and developing proficiency, right? To become proficient in a language, you need copious amounts of comprehensible input. Great place to get that is in a literature class, right? And so everyone can see really clearly how they make up the fabric of this initiative. And it's a beautiful thing. What's also nice about this initiative is that it's a clear starting point for revamping classes. We have a common understanding about what it means to become proficient in a language and how that can happen. And so if you look at the scales, it makes questions that can historically be kind of thorny to deal with really actually easy to rationalize out. So like a common thing at like 100 level classes is that you teach the subjunctive and have them produce the subjunctive. But the subjunctive goes to superior level functions, right? It's more about hypothesizing and discussing topics abstractly. And students at the 100 level are not able to hypothesize. And so you can maybe remove the subjunctive, or you can just teach it for receptive understanding or something like that. And that's just an example. It makes it all a lot easier to rationalize and think through for all of our faculty members and creates that kind of common understanding. So that is the end of my spiel. Andrew, maybe I'll throw it on over to you. If there are questions, I'd be really happy to answer them. For those that have stuck with me, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
With a wonderful presentation come wonderful questions. So go ahead and strap in. It looks like we've got about 20 minutes, and we will certainly fill those 20 minutes with a little Q&A session here. First and foremost, there were a lot of questions / comments about how it looks like programs across the country are modeling their programs after yours. And they're asking you, Leanne, if your PowerPoint presentation will be made available to them.
Sure, I think I can do that, sure. And I think we're also going to disseminate a recording of this, Andrew, is that right?
We are. Yeah. Yeah, by I believe Monday, we will be sending a follow-up email that has, a bit of information, and it will include a recording of this webinar. But for those interested in, seeing the PowerPoint and kind of clicking through it at their own speed, you've got Leanne's email address right there. You can certainly reach out directly to her.
Yeah, I'd be very happy to.
Awesome. Next question. It's a question about the other courses. I assume these are, the non-language courses. Are they in the target language, or are they in English? So talking about, the quote unquote cross-discipline type courses.
Yeah, that's a great question. It kind of depends. It depends a lot on the student. So at the University of Rhode Island, the majority of the other courses are not in the target language. But when students go abroad, that's when things can get very different depending on the students. So depending on their proficiency level, they might be able to direct enroll in a class with native speakers of the language and take a course about the subject matter they're studying in the target language, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's a fantastic question. It depends. I also know that so the majority of our German students are German engineering students. And so we do have certain courses that dovetail with their specialty. So there are courses here at URI, but it's not all of them. It's specific courses, and then maybe they can direct enroll in courses when they go abroad.
Great, thank you. In order to achieve advanced low, about how many years or semesters of language do students typically need, and how many hours per week?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really depends. And so ACTFL has this estimate about oral proficiency levels in the workforce, and they'll put at advanced low, if you guys can see, undergraduate language majors. That's a great goal. It doesn't necessarily mean, though, that all undergraduate language majors end at advanced low. Um, yes, not all of them do. There was an ACTFL flagship proficiency initiative that I think took like about 10,000 students and looked at where they ended up. And I'm trying to remember, but I think most students probably end up at probably intermediate high-ish speaking ability. So advanced low is still kind of a lofty goal. Um, and so, yeah, I don't know that there are like exact firm numbers. It depends really on the student. It depends on the quality of instruction. Honestly, it depends on whether or not they went abroad, what they did abroad, and what they do in their free time. So I don't know that there's a perfect number for each and every student. But advanced low is a feasible but difficult goal for undergraduate language majors, if that helps.
Great. What are the pros and cons of using ACTFL standards as opposed to CEFR, so Common European Framework of Reference, at least for the European languages? Was that a consideration at URI?
Yeah, a lot of the conversations of when they decided between ACTFL and CEFR predated me. I know that for German, when they go abroad, a lot of them still do use CEFR and they kind of retrofit them onto the ACTFL guidelines. Um, so I can't speak to kind of how that conversation went before I got here. But I will say that the ACTFL guidelines are easy to train ourselves on in an American context in the United States. And so that's one of the reasons that it's really has been easy to implement here at the University of Rhode Island. We can have people come and train us easily. And there are equivalencies between ACTFL and CEFR, and you can get, and Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, but for all of the tests, I think you can actually get separate results instead of on the ACTFL scale, right? Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. ACTFL proficiency ratings or ILR, which is widely recognized in, US federal government, as well as CEFR.
Yeah.
And even for those
And so,
students who have received ACTFL scores, there is a crosswalk that essentially allows them to say, okay, advanced low is equivalent to so on and so forth.
yeah. Yeah. And so we had some faculty members at our department that I think were more familiar with CEFR, but they ultimately voted for ACTFL. I think the vote makes sense. In the US context, it's a good scale to use, and it was really easy to train ourselves on. I think that was kind of the most important part. We could have people come here and have us understand the scale. The workshops are fantastic, the 4-day OPI workshops. People just really enjoyed them, as you could see by the number of people that decided that they wanted to become certified OPI testers afterwards. So we've just had an overall good experience with the ACTFL scale.
Okay. In examining students' proficiencies for placement purposes, how do you account for other factors that may affect placement, such as heritage language learner status, years taken in high school, etc.?
Yeah, that's a great question. The question of how to place students is a question that we're still dealing with. And so in languages that are more commonly studied in high school, we see this a lot in Spanish and French and Italian. We're really actually currently working to improve our placement mechanism. And we want to find a placement mechanism that jives with the spirit of what we're doing here. And so but that's hard, right? Like a lot of the placement tests are like fill in the blank grammar drills. And so it's weird to give a student that kind of test and then tell them that they've landed in a proficiency oriented program. Like it's been a difficult journey. And so a lot of our placement we do with seat time. So how much have you studied in high school? How well did that go for you? And that determines right now where you place. But we're looking to revamp that and systematize it better in the future, because you can see how this placement question is intricately tied to the proficiency initiative, right? We're going to see the best language gains if they're placed properly to begin with. So I think this semester, actually, we're going to look into seeing if a vocabulary test can help place students, because that kind of goes best in the spirit of this initiative. But yeah, we're actually still, we're still struggling with that one, and we're still working towards it and trying to make evidence-based decisions on how to go about. So if anyone has the magic solution, send it to me. I'd love to see it.
And just another quick shameless plug, ACTFL does have in development an what is called the ACTFL Proficiency Placement Test that will be released this summer, ready for use next fall. Okay, next question.
It hasn't been at our disposal yet. How's that?
Of course. Yeah. For universities that don't or won't allow course fees, can students use financial aid by purchasing quote unquote test codes through the university bookstore?
That I do not know. Andrew, do you know?
I'm not sure.
That's an interesting way to think about it.
It is. I can certainly ask around to see if there are other institutions that do it that way, and we can get back to you. It looks like that question was from Suzanne Johnston. So
okay, yeah.
Table that one for now.
Hi, Susie. Thanks for tuning in, Susie. I know her. Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, I think, but I think that's important. It taps on something important, that it's good to think of creative ways to get this done, right? Because ideally, you want as many students as possible to do this so that you can effectively evaluate the program and make the changes you need to increase their proficiency, right? So I'm all for creative solutions. I don't know if that one's viable. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have midpoint goals for students as well as endpoint units?
Yes, but they vary by language. And I don't know them all off the top of my head. I'm sorry. I should have put a slide with that. Because the midpoint is different by language. And so, yeah, the goals and languages are not equally necessarily difficult or as easy to acquire. But I don't have them off at the top of my head. What we're trying to do, though, is put benchmarking at all parts of our curriculum. And one of the things that I didn't mention, but perhaps I should, is that the faculty here are flexible, and they're looking to do the best job that we can. And so right now, that looks like testing at the midpoint and the endpoint and testing speaking. But we have looked at reading and listening before, and I think we're going to keep the speaking. I think that that's kind of the staple, because that's what employers look for when our students go on the marketplace. But we're also thinking about benchmarks not just for speaking and what that could look like. We're also thinking about benchmarks for other skills. The speaking tests are great, but they could give the impression that you just need to speak in order to speak better. And that's not necessarily 100% true, right? Like, you still need comprehensible input in the language, and lots of it. And so sometimes I'm afraid that just a speaking test sends the message that speaking is what's important, when really they need input as well, right? So we're going to look into perhaps other tests and seeing if we can get kind of a more comprehensive picture. So yes, we do benchmark at the midpoint. Sorry, that's the quick answer. And we're trying to benchmark better across all of our programs, and not just for speaking. But I talked about that proficiency roadmap, and part of what we're charging all of the different language programs to do is think about what they want those benchmarks to look like for each skill, for each language.
Okay, next question is, I believe it appeared 4 or 5 times. What happens if a student does not reach the advanced low level? Do they still get the dual bachelor's degree in a language and IGS?
So for the International Studies and Diplomacy program, so just to make sure that I'm being super clear, the benchmark of advanced low is a necessity only for the International Studies and Diplomacy program, not for our other signature programs. Chinese Flagship has their own benchmarks, which are actually even higher, and that's critical for them. But in terms of our other language students, the Advanced Low benchmark only matters for International Studies and Diplomacy. And what we do is we test those students a little bit earlier, so not like the day before they graduate. We test them generally when they come back from study abroad at the end of their junior year to see where they are. And if they're not at advanced low, then we provide an off-ramp for them where they can still get a language degree and a minor in something else, but they do, in order to graduate from the International Studies and Diplomacy program, have to evidence advanced low speaking proficiency. So you cannot graduate from that program without doing that. But we do take care of them and we do test them earlier, and then we do provide them with other options in terms of degrees that they could get based on their test results.
Perfect, thank you. Next question, how did you get colleagues who normally teach upper level language courses that focus on literature to participate in proficiency training and proficiency testing?
Yeah, that's the magic of our chair right now. Yeah, a lot of these conversations predated me. I can say that I was thoroughly perplexed when I landed at the University of Rhode Island and everyone was just gung-ho and for this. That is not common, and I recognize that, and I'm still shocked. Now knowing everyone, I could see how it happened, right? But I would say that that's not common. I think what's important is the way that it's framed, because literature classes actually play a really important role in all of this, right? Like no one is looking to make literature classes obsolete and not necessary. Literature classes can play a super important role in the development of proficiency. And if we're building out to the rest of our goal, literature classes can play a really important role in the development of intercultural communicative competence, right? And so I think it's a question of framing, that reframing our programs isn't necessarily, it doesn't constitute a threat to people that maybe aren't from this area, right? So our chair does literature and she still sees the worth in this, right? And it helps her inform how she's teaching. She still teaches literature content. But you know, background knowledge about these guidelines and what that can mean for teaching actually can improve those classes, because when students don't understand or when a reading is maybe too complex for them, you know why, and you know what to do to scaffold them so that you can engage in the type of discussions that you want to engage in your literature course. So I think it's a net positive for everyone. It's just a question of proper framing and a good understanding of what you're trying to do.
Great, and to piggyback off of that, another faculty question. So looking at graduate faculty and adjunct faculty, how do you get them trained and get them on the same page?
Yeah, so what we have to focus on most here is part-time faculty members. That is, we have full-time and part-time faculty members. The ratio of part-time faculty members to full-time faculty members is different depending on the languages. So you have languages that rely heavily on part-time faculty members and languages that don't, that are actually all taught by full-time faculty members. So each language program is actually pretty different. We've taken a variety of different measures. Our part-time faculty staff is great, but we can't ask them to do all the things that we ask our full-time faculty members to do, right? Like we can't just say, clear your schedules, 4-day workshop coming at you. That doesn't go into their contract very well. And so we're looking for workarounds. We'll have you know, short meetings where we explain in broad brushstrokes the goals of the courses. And what we're looking to do with the curricular revamping is actually provide our part-time faculty with not only a syllabus and then say good luck, right? We're looking to provide them with actually constructed classes that are a jumping board. That's a word, right? A starting point for how they can conceive of the class each day. And so they'll have an example of a class that we believe fits into the framework of what we're doing, and then they can do with that class with that class as they please, right? So they can implement it fully, they can look at the goal and just find a different way to get to that same goal, right? And we're hoping that through osmosis, by providing these classes, that everyone will kind of see kind of what the spirit is of what we're trying to do in our language classes. But that's a great question. Yeah.
And as much as it breaks my heart, we're going to take just one more question because we are almost out of time. It is a good question to end on, though.
All right.
How do you correlate standard letter grades to progress in proficiency?
Yeah, that's a really great question. The very quick answer is right now we don't. And the thought process being that we're at kind of the nascent phases of this. And so we haven't fully revamped our curriculum. And so I'm not comfortable telling students that they necessarily have to be at a certain benchmark unless they're in a program that they know that this is this way from the outset. And by the time they graduate, the program will actually probably have overhauled our curriculum. So we don't do that. We do not link their scores to their grades at this moment. There's a new study coming out of Michigan State University. I forget all the authors on it, so I don't want to mess it up. But they did look at what you could do if you were to tie proficiency scores to a percentage of a grade, how that could help students maybe get a higher score. And so, yeah, we could look into that in the future, but the short answer is right now we don't. It's associated with their classes in the sense that they take it during class time, but that does not mean that their grade in the class hinges on the score that they get on the proficiency test.
Great, thank you, Leanne. With all the wonderful feedback we're getting in this chat box and in the question box, I am starting to sense a round 2 for this webinar.
Okay.
If we can get Dr. Spinocejas to bless us with a little bit more of her time in the coming weeks and the coming months. But for now, I would like to personally thank her and thank her on behalf of all of the attendees today. Many thanks to all the attendees as well for carving out this time in your busy schedules. We will certainly follow up with an email that includes, once again, a video of this webinar so that you can rewatch, so that you can share with your colleagues. You see Leanne's email address right there on the screen. I just posted my email address in the chat box. I realized that I had forgotten to include that. It is at abowen@languagetesting.com if you have any questions for me. But again, you will be hearing from us very shortly with a quick wrap up of the webinar, a video copy as well. And thank you very much. Leanne, any closing remarks for us?
No, thank you so much for your time, everyone. I'm really excited about what we're doing at the University of Rhode Island. The tests that we've been doing have been really helpful. And I'm just so excited that other people are excited to hear about it. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Great. And specifically from Michigan State University, they love you there and they miss you dearly.
Oh, I don't know who that is, but thank you. Very mutual.
And on that note, we will go ahead and end for today, but we will see you soon. Thanks again for joining us, and we will be in touch.
All right, thank you so much.